And now, Don Duvall, Chairman of Illinois Corn Marketing Board. Jim Jalbert, President and owner, C&J Bus Lines. James Strange, Vice President at Advanced Electrical Systems. And Karen Kerrigan, President and CEO at Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here, and we have the final panel, a small business panel, so we have all the solutions, right, guys?
Absolutely.
So, you know, our panel and the members on the panel, we had, at least I had the value of hearing all the great conversations and the compelling data that was shared today regarding the dire need for investment in infrastructure, you know, how we get there, as well as the big cost in terms of inaction to U.S. productivity, economic growth, businesses of all sizes, our workforce, consumers, et cetera. And as we know, with most costs on business, small to mid-sized firms are disproportionately burdened and impacted. So joining me for this panel, we have Don, Jim, and James to discuss that impact, as well as the positive role that small firms can play in modernizing our nation's infrastructure. So to begin with, I guess a general question for each of you. You either work on or represent a different industry or sector. So from your perspectives, what is the impact of inaction? And you know, what would it mean for your sector and your industry if there was a big infrastructure package? And we'll start with you, Don.
Well, I am a fourth-generation farmer in Illinois, southern Illinois, and we raise corn, soybeans, wheat. Our product has its value only when we get it to the marketplace. So be that roads and bridges, rail, and ultimately the inland waterway system is hugely important. It's how we get our product into a monetary value for us. So it's hugely critical.
I mean, for us, we're in the transportation business, and we move people every day. Last year, we moved over 800,000 people in and out of Boston into New York City, and so the condition of the roadways and the capacity to get from point A to point B without significant congestion is critical to running an on-time and successful bus company. You know, we're not fourth generation, and congratulations, because that's really incredible, right? Never supposed to happen, and you did it. But you know, I'm second generation, third generation's about to start, and I sit there and I wonder, how can we continue to be successful? And what are the key factors in that success? And one of them is having good infrastructure, making sure that the roads and bridges in which we travel work, creating good partnerships with our respective the states that we serve, be it New Hampshire or Massachusetts or New York, and trying to make sure we add value, and we can't add value if we can't get you there on time. And all of you, some of you probably flew here today, and you know what it's like when you're sitting at the gate at National, and they wheel you out and they say, "Hey, we got a ground stop for an hour and a half." Every morning when I move commuters into Boston and they see that, it's difficult, right? If we hit a gridlock and there's no place to put us, so it's critical to our future.
Mm-hmm.
Advanced Electrical Systems, so we're a commercial industrial electrical contractor. The big impact on us is, you know, we have roughly 250 to 300 electricians on a job, so if they don't have the material, the tools they need to perform their work, they're just an expense for us. We've got 20, 30 guys in a service department, so if they're stuck in traffic for an hour, 2 hours a day, I have to pay those individuals, but I can't actually bill them out to my customers, so being able to get them from job to job is very important for us. As far as investing in infrastructure, I mean, that's a bulk of the work we do, whether it's working at an airport, highway, transmission lines. So we're cautiously optimistic something can get done on this infrastructure.
Well, that's good. Yeah, we need that. We need big optimism. We're going to will this thing to happen this year, right? Again, Thomas Smith, he was with the civil engineers, and he talked about the impact for the economy, a $3.9 trillion GDP impact, negative impact, $3,400, per year per family, the cost of inaction. I mean, are there any other specific examples that you can share? Being on the front line, and that I know our members, we have 100,000 small business owners, and I hear their horror stories. But I mean, any type of real other stories that you could share in terms of the real impact?
I can tell you just for us alone in Louisville, Kentucky, we have a bridge that connects us to Indiana, and it hosts 90,000 people a day that was shut down for 3 months unexpectedly. So we had a lot of jobs in that area that we would have to drive an additional 30 to 45 minutes to get to that job. The bottlenecks it cost within our city for UPS has got a big supply chain. You can see they put a lot of their projects on holds, which are projects we were going to do. So we thought we had jobs to keep these guys busy and working, and they put them on hold just because of an infrastructure project, which is firsthand going on here.
Rich McCardle hit it right on the head this morning from UPS when he chatted about they spend north of $114 million on an annualized basis to position vehicles and additional staffing. Well, we're not certainly in that arena, but we spend way in excess of $100,000 a year just to position vehicles to keep on schedule. And that's because of traffic in and out of Boston and New York City. And it's not only the soft cost, it's what's the capital investment. An intercity motor coach costs north of $500,000. Some of our New York buses cost in excess of $700,000. So when you have to stock or add that additional capital, plus all those associated soft costs, it's very impactful. And you can't always just charge it away. I mean, I think when you look at some airports, and I think that Congressman DeFazio chatted about that, where the airlines don't want more gates, right? They don't want the competition, and it gives them license to really play with fares. We can't do that. We're in a very competitive environment. From the northern New England region to New York, as an example, there's probably 75 to 100 trips a day. So we're all in competition with one another, and it's hard when we operate on roadways that should normally take an hour and a half and can take 3, or normally take 5 and take 8.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Well, I guess the nature of farming is such that it's difficult to quantify, much like you can when you have a one location factory. But in my case, I have different fields in different locations, so the transportation is different for each one of those locations. But certainly, it's all along that transportation chain that different breakdowns have different effects on it. From the standpoint of one field has a small bridge that's a township bridge, not a state bridge, not a county bridge, but a township bridge that went out. Consequently, I have to make a detour around that. All the way up to major bridge. There's a major bridge that actually crosses the Wabash River that has been closed for a number of years, and it created about a 17 to 20 mile detour that you had to go. Obviously there's the increased fuel cost, but more importantly, I think it's probably that loss of time that added probably 45 minutes to an hour to each of those truck trips. And in farming, many times you're battling Mother Nature and the weather, and so time is of the essence. And so it's to lose another hour per truckload is extremely costly.
And then we end up talking about traffic when we're home. I wonder how much the cost is. How much time we spend talking about this all the time. Once you're, you go through it all, and just the stories around the dinner table. I mean, all we talk about is traffic. At least it seems that way. In this area, in the Northern Virginia, Greater Washington D.C. area. So,
if I could, I'd go a little bit farther on that transportation chain. A lot of my grain is exported because I live in the tri-state area where there's 3 rivers that converge, so much of my corn is exported, probably more than 50%. But there's a breakdown there as well that creates an additional cost. The locks and dam systems are set up to do 600-foot barge tows. The rest of the industry operates under 1,200 foot, so they have to break those down at every one of the locks. So that increases the cost of the transportation. That cost is put back to the farmer in the form of basis. The market price that we get has that figured into it, so we get less of a market price because of that breakdown in transportation. And that's really critical right now. The farm economy has been suffering for about the last 5 years, so any hiccup in the transportation cost translates directly to our bottom line, and that's crucial right now for agriculture.
I mean, in regards to traffic, think about it, from Washington to New York to Boston, all the way up Interstate 95 into New Hampshire and Maine, congestion is on the move. And there's significant congestion, as you know, because you live in the area down here, but it's following us all the way up. So what's it doing? It's not only wearing the infrastructure out, and so that's why we need to do something, but beyond that, it's creating a significant environmental impact. You have countless vehicles that sit for hours on end in gridlock, idling. I mean, the emissions impact to our environment is terrible. And I think the tragedy is it has been politically expedient for state and federal elected officials to do nothing. But it's costing us it is costing us the capacity to grow and to be vibrant and to really fund this nation. Everybody sits there and says, oh, we can't spend a nickel a gallon, we can't spend a dime a gallon. But the ROI on that is incredible. What does that do to grow the economy? You don't only have to do tax cuts. If we're going to go spend all this money on tax cuts, which, for people who are in capital-intensive businesses, those tax credits were great. You've got to invest in other ways. And people who use the systems need to pay for the systems.
So that brings us to, sort of the big question, I guess, the funding mechanism. How do we make, this work? Because we looked at the numbers again during the course of the day. Multi-trillion-dollar investment or resources are going to be needed to do a big comprehensive type of infrastructure package. We're around business people, all the time. I think, our panel, and there's obviously a lot of my members don't like tax increases. But on the transportation and the infrastructure issue, I think there is, they're a little more reasonable in terms of, what they're willing to pay, if that is an investment that actually goes to something. So what about this mix, that we talked about, the taxes, private-public partnerships? I just want to get your, sort of your, I guess, on-the-ground business, wisdom or what you're thinking about that and how you've seen actually maybe some of those models work. So, want to start with you?
I mean, as a business owner, you hear the cost of not investing in infrastructure. So after sitting here today, you should realize we need to pay for this. Now, I work in construction, so trying to figure out how to actually make this to pay for it, it's above my pay grade, but we hope everybody here in town can figure that out. If you invest $1 billion in infrastructure investment, it creates 28,000 direct and indirect jobs. And, we were talking earlier today of when Louisville, Kentucky, they built 2 bridges about 3 years ago. It was one of the largest infrastructure projects in the United States, and the East End Bridge was a public and private partnership. So that was one of the big things because Kentucky wasn't willing to build the downtown 65 bridge without the East End Bridge. So they got both bridges built with a public-private partnership, and just that job alone they were such a bonus to getting ahead of schedule. We help support a lot of rock quarries, and I have some friends that own trucking companies, and he said 2 years into the project, to pay the dump truck drivers, they were having to pay their drivers $10 more an hour. So just look at what you're doing for the individuals that not only working more overtime, but their wages went up $10 an hour just from having that much work going on. So it's when you invest in your economy, and it drives up the wages as well.
So if you think about the importance of investing in infrastructure, what should we do? How do we get people to agree to this in Washington? And more importantly, how do we get people to contain their appetite to projects that are related to transportation? We have so many red-listed bridges across this country, so many deteriorating highways. We heard about the interstate system earlier. How can we rein in the appetite to make sure that we invest those dollars where they need to go, and that future investment be well thought out and be spent on what's going to happen, or anticipate what's going to happen in the next 30 to 50 years? I think the reason why nobody anticipated that those cities and towns along Interstate 95 would use Interstate 95 for an on and off ramp to get around 6 traffic lights, right? We didn't think that we would have that many people, move to those small rural areas, which are now big urbanized areas. So we have to anticipate the future growth. We have to think of the technology and transportation. And I don't care if it floats or it runs on asphalt or it flies in the air, all of it. We've got to figure out how to really do a good job at planning for long-term accessibility. We don't need another bridge to nowhere. And that, I think that's the biggest fear, right? We don't need another bridge to nowhere. On P3s, I think, everybody gets hung up on the financing, using P3s as financing. There are so many wonderful ways to do P3s. We heard about the individual from Michigan who was on an earlier panel talking about leveraging bonding with local development for offices. We're in the middle of a P3 right now, our own company, where we're taking a bus terminal that the state of New Hampshire built over 20 years ago, which we occupied. It was actually a P3 way back then before they called it P3. New Hampshire doesn't have a transit system outside of our highways and roads. So we're one of the bus companies that agreed to run out of there in exchange for the parking lot and the bus terminal. We've now gone back and said, we need to grow this thing, expand it. And they're like, well, we don't have the money. And I'm like, okay, we'll lease it. Let us expand it. We'll charge a nominal parking fee, and we'll recapitalize the facility. It's a great example of something where, the municipalities now get paid in taxes where they normally wouldn't have. New Hampshire is looking at taking the receipts from parking, a percentage of it, and redirecting it toward transit. So you've got to think out of the box when you want to do a P3, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to do not only transit, but urban development, a host of things.
So there's got to be the flexibility.
You've got to be flexible, and you've got to have people who want to commit the dollars to do it.
Yep. Any thoughts?
I guess an example that I could cite would be about 3 or 4 years ago, National Corn Growers Association, in addition to the Illinois Corn Marketing Board, joined a broad-based coalition that increased the inland waterway barge fuel tax from 20 cents to 29 cents. And that generated about $80 million a year, and that's directly paid by the users, and it's, I think it's a success story.
So the president's going to give his State of the Union tonight, and we hear there will be infrastructure mentioned, but infrastructure has been mentioned for how many years now? Yeah. I mean, it's been a big priority of the business community for quite a long time. Really, nothing has been done at the federal level. I mean, a lot happening, obviously, at the state level and the local level. I mean, what do you think it's going to take, to get Congress to act? I mean, I was heartened to hear before we came on, Representative Budd was talking about him reaching across the aisle, and working on a bipartisan basis. I mean, that's how we found how we were able to get things through. If two, strange bedfellows come together and put something on the table, and despite the criticism, they move forward because it is so important. But what do you think? I mean, where do we go from here? How is this going to happen? I mean, I know leadership is a big thing, but any thoughts on that, James? How do we make this happen?
I think Jim knows that one. No, you need everybody to come together, and it's not a Democratic issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's an American issue. And it's almost one of those scratch your head of why are we having such an issue, because it seems like everybody uses the infrastructure, whether we're talking roads, airports, rail. So it's important for us to be competitive on a global economy. So we need events like this to speak up and make sure Congress knows how important it is. I don't understand why it's as difficult it is to get everybody to come together on an American issue like this.
Yeah, because the data is, people are in it. They know, they experience it on a day-to-day basis. And then when you look at the data, it's pretty compelling, in terms of the cost of GDP, jobs, and it just keeps getting worse and worse, as years go by. So,
yeah,
Jim?
Look, first of all, if we increase fuel taxes or fine, whether it's VMT, fuel taxes, which is going to be fuel taxes right now, I fully advocate for that increase, not only on a national level, but on a state level as well, if need be, because you have to get the states to not only there's still not going to be enough, right? There's still not going to be enough. So you've got to get the states to participate. A lot of this money is shared money where the states will have to come up with a percentage of it, and they don't have the funds to do it without raising taxes. But it's confined to the users. People who pay these taxes are people who use the services every day. And yes, there is some trickle down in charges for goods and other things like that, but you never get all of that back, right? You can never charge away for that. Wouldn't you love to be able to raise your electrical service rates, James, to another $10 an hour because of fuel tax? Well, you won't do it. And how I wish for the days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, where you had two fellows who were completely opposite, who knew how to get together and who knew how to solve problems and always put country first. And we don't have that, and it's tragic at this time that we don't have that. And I am hopeful that they will start doing that in Washington.
Well, even though you promised that we were going to solve all the problems at the onset of this discussion, I think it may be a little presumptuous to assume that we're going to solve this partisan politics climate that currently exists. But I would say, it's unfortunate that both parties are willing to cut off their nose to spite their face. But I would say that if there's any topic that they should be able to come together, it's transportation. So I think there's an opportunity here. I think certainly it would behoove us to remind our politicians that, this is an issue that we all benefit from. It's popular in the public. They want it. It should be a no-brainer. And I think we should remind them that it's time to, do what we sent them there for.
There are no losers.
Yeah.
There are no losers.
Yeah, and I don't know, just maybe any final thoughts on this. We've got just a couple of minutes left, but we talked about businesses being impacted by the cost, lost productivity, vehicle maintenance, sitting in traffic. All of that, right? Just those costs add up. But on the flip side, I think a big package like this offers us the opportunity to also tap into the innovators, the entrepreneurs, who are going to, make things work and tick so much better, and really get the ideas of those entrepreneurs and those innovators going, and embedding things that maybe work in the private sector and that have application, in the transportation. Any thoughts on that in terms of, a package really would give us the opportunity to tap into the best innovators out there as well to really solve this challenge in a cost-effective way. I guess I said it, right? Okay, any final thoughts? We got about a minute and a half left on the need to do this, and any final plea to our elected officials, and we want to get this done this year. We've got to will it, I think, to happen and really push hard. So any final thoughts that you might have? James?
The issue's not going to go away, and it's only going to get worse and compound, so we need to act quickly and to make sure it's a bill that encompasses everything, not just highway, and like Jim mentioned earlier. So we need to focus on all aspects, and it needs to be big.
Mm-hmm.
You just said it, we have so much brain power right now. There's so much AI capacity, right? Artificial intelligence, what's going to happen, you know, autonomous vehicles. There's so many things we can do, and we've got to harbor that all together and work and get a bill done that's going to bring us to the future, that is going to bring us to the next generation, if you will.
Well said. Don?
From an agricultural standpoint, trade is essentially important to our livelihood, and transportation is essentially important to trade. So they go hand in hand, and I can't stress the importance enough.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. This was a fantastic panel. Please join me in a round of applause. Our innovators and job creators, and I think we're going to exit this way. And